Now we have Dr. Lynn Addington. She is a professor at American University in Washington, D.C. And before I tell about what she does, I want to thank her for sponsoring, and her American University for sponsoring the photography. This was very last minute and it was arranged, so thank you. And please pass the thanks on to your school. So Dr. Lynn Addington's research focuses on violent victimization and policy responses to prevent violence and serve victims. She is a recognized national expert on crime data and statistics. Today she will talk about investing in data to better understand how to improve justice for women and girls.
Great, thank you. Unlike some of the previous panelists who spoke to issues connected with a particular research agenda, my remarks are focused on a broader call for investment in the infrastructure of statistical data. In the era of big data and our steady reliance on internet search engines, it's easy to assume that all the data we need are just out there. But high quality, reliable, and valid measures, and here I'm speaking about crime statistics required for evidence-based policy and research, these data aren't just a Google search away unless we purposefully invest in them. And this work requires federal funding to collect these data and disseminate the findings to a range of audiences. Today I will focus on three main areas where data are needed: women as crime victims, women's use of victim services, and women as offenders. At the end of my remarks, I will offer a few suggestions for ways to support the data we need for policy that speaks to justice for women and girls. My first area concerns women as victims. Here, two groups of crime disproportionately affect women due to either the nature of the crime or their overrepresentation of women in the population at risk. Certain crimes by their nature disproportionately affect women as victims, such as sexual assault, stalking, and intimate partner violence. Sexual assault has garnered a great deal of attention recently, overall as part of the Me Too movement, and specifically in the context of college-attending women. Despite this attention, funding is needed to increase the amount of data we collect. The Me Too movement highlights the range of victims of sexual assault and emphasizes the need for our current crime data collections to improve coverage of victim groups who are at risk for sexual violence but are largely underserved and understudied due to a lack of data in police records and limited coverage in victim surveys. These groups include women of color, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women, immigrant women, disabled women, and poor women. Gaining this information will help policymakers and researchers better understand the extent of the problem, as well as risk and protective factors. Emerging adult women have one of the greatest risks for sexual violence. As such, attention to sexual violence on college campuses remains an important issue. This focus, though, ignores the 30% of female recent high school graduates who do not attend college and who some studies suggest are at greater risk for sexual violence than their college counterparts. Studying non-college attending women, as well as those who are not enrolled in traditional four-year programs, is needed to inform policy, especially opportunities for services and prevention. Intimate partner violence and stalking are two additional crimes that by their nature largely affect women as victims. As with sexual assault, more data are needed on women in understudied at-risk groups. There's also a need for methodological work to improve data for policy and research. Stalking and IPV are challenging to capture in existing data collections as these victims experience a continuous state of victimization rather than discrete incidents. Funding is needed to identify alternative ways to measure these crimes and augment our existing statistics to provide a clearer picture of this violence and ways to intervene to reduce harm to victims. A second group of crimes that disproportionately affect women as victims is due to their overrepresentation in the population at risk. One example is crime against older Americans, those over age 65, which is an age group that continues to be disproportionately female. In this context, we typically think of crimes against the elderly and the images of physical, emotional, or financial abuse against frail seniors, typically those residing in assisted living or nursing homes. While these crimes against the elderly remain important to study, There is a growing need to think beyond this paradigm, given the demographic changes occurring with the baby boomers, who are transforming aging in ways that will likely affect their victimization experiences and make their risks similar to younger demographic groups. We need to fund data collections to consider the victimization of older Americans, especially women, beyond elder abuse, into a broader range of spaces and situations. The second data need I will focus on is the use of victim services, as women are the major beneficiaries of this support. This year, the Office for Victims of Crime will allocate $3.4 billion for victim services. Using these funds wisely requires investing in data to gain a better understanding of responses to victimization. There's a glaring lack of data on victim services, and OVC documents this need in their Visions 21 report. Gaining this information could inform policy and program initiatives. A few examples of the data to be collected are services victims receive and satisfaction with those services, reasons victims do and do not seek services, services that are needed but not available, and patterns of service use by repeat victims, especially IPV and stalking victims. As with victimization, data on victim services is especially needed for those at-risk, underserved groups. The third and final area I will discuss is women as criminal offenders. Here, police data provide an essential resource for identifying trends and patterns. Additional investment could support the FBI's current efforts to convert its Uniform Crime Reporting Program into a fully incident-based program by January 1st, 2021. This system, known as NIBRS, or the National Incident-Based Reporting System, captures police data details previously not available, including offender demographics for over 50 crimes. As such, NIBRS is uniquely positioned to inform on women's offending. NIBRS represents a huge shift from the UCR's traditional aggregate crime data. The FBI is working to develop products to disseminate this rich detail in user-friendly ways. Additional funding on this work could allow the details NIBRS collects on women offenders to be readily accessed. Considering justice for women and girls must include investment in high-quality data to provide the statistical measures required to identify trends, document programmatic needs, and evaluate policies. I will conclude with 4 broad recommendations. One is to expand funding for the existing data collection infrastructure at the Bureau of Justice Statistics and FBI, as their data shed light on the victimization of women and their participation in offending. A second suggestion is to invest in the collection of data on the availability, use, and effectiveness of victim services. Some of this information may be obtained by modifying existing data collections, but new efforts may be required. A third is to fund research into evidence-based best practices for collecting data on women in understudied at-risk groups and older Americans. And a fourth and final suggestion is to invest in ways to disseminate this information to a broad range of audiences, including policymakers, practitioners, researchers, and the general public. Here, an emphasis should be placed on leveraging web-based analytical tools and interactive formats to allow users to customize reports to obtain the information they need. Thank you.